On March 29, 2016, aboard EgyptAir Flight MS181, a man stood up out of nowhere, calmly pulling back his jacket to show a vest crisscrossed with explosives. In a flash, Seif Eldin Mustafa had turned an ordinary flight into a living nightmare for the 56 passengers on the plane. Fear flooded the cabin. Mustafa's voice was calm and cold, threatening to blow the plane apart if the authorities did not meet his demands. Crew members looked at each other in panic, and passengers sat trapped in their seats, not daring to even whisper as the situation spiraled out of control. Egyptian negotiators reached the crew over the cockpit's radio, desperate to talk to Mustafa, but with each passing second, the likelihood of an international disaster grew. And then, amid the tense standoff, one passenger, Ben Innes, did the unthinkable. He stood up. Eyes fixed on Mustafa, he moved down the aisle, ignoring the gasps and horrified glances around him. Even Mustafa paused, caught off guard by this unexpected approach. Innes stopped inches from the bomb, meeting the hijacker's stare with an uncanny calm. And then, in a surreal twist, he asked the hijacker for a selfie. As the camera clicked, Innes smiled like a wide-eyed tourist. But beneath that grin was the slightest glint of calculation. The morning of March 29, 2016, began like any other for the passengers aboard EgyptAir Flight MS181. 56 passengers and 7 crew members filled the Airbus A320 as it took off from Borg El Arab Airport in Alexandria, bound for Cairo. Among them was Ben Innes, a British oil worker from Aberdeen. Shortly after takeoff, a man rose from his seat. Seif Eldin Mustafa, a middle-aged Egyptian man with a scruffy appearance and a wild look in his eye, caught the passengers off guard. His voice was soft yet unflinching, breaking the quiet calm with a single horrifying declaration. He was wearing an explosive belt. The cabin froze. Innes was having trouble understanding what exactly the man was demanding. Mustafa communicated primarily in Arabic, so Innes could not understand the details of the situation, but the explosive belt made the stakes very clear. Whispers spread, glances darted from face to face, and passengers looked around in a mix of shock and disbelief. Flight attendants rushed into action, exchanging alarmed looks as they tried to stay calm. Mustafa demanded the pilots divert the flight to Cyprus. With no clear picture of his motives, the crew worked to keep him calm, while weighing every word and every move the strange man made. Ben Innes, seated a few rows back, observed everything with a mix of curiosity and fear. The scene around him was tense. Passengers clutching their belongings, some mumbling hurried prayers. No one dared to stand or speak up. Even without knowing all the details, everyone understood one thing. The Airbus had just been hijacked, and they were all now hostages of a madman. At 7:50 a.m., EgyptAir Flight MS181 changed course, diverting sharply away from Cairo towards Cyprus. Mustafa had claimed his explosive belt could take the aircraft down, and now the Airbus was descending toward Lamaka International Airport under his control. His plans were a mystery for passengers and crew. Innes remembered, quote, "I could see he was wearing what looked like a bomb, and I was obviously very scared, but he didn't seem particularly anxious." From their windows, passengers could see rows of flashing lights. Police vehicles and armed security waiting on the ground. Tension rippled through the cabin. The Cypriot officials had mobilized quickly, setting up a perimeter as the aircraft approached. For those on board, every second felt stretched. Any wrong move or mistake could be catastrophic. Innes sat tense like the others, but while most were frozen in fear, he found himself studying Mustafa's every move. Something didn't add up in the hijacker's demeanor. He wasn't shouting, pacing, or looking particularly anxious, and Innes couldn't shake the question. Was the man truly dangerous, or just a desperate showman? He needed to know if that belt was genuine, and there was only one way to find out. The air grew thick with dread, and from every window, the passengers saw the waiting authorities, their presence only deepening the sense that one way or another, this was far from over. As EgyptAir Flight MS181 remained grounded at Lamaka International Airport, negotiations with Seif Eldin Mustafa intensified. Mustafa's demands were erratic and perplexing. he insisted on meeting his estranged wife in Cypriot, a request that left authorities and passengers puzzled. Over the next few hours, Mustafa allowed some passengers to leave, releasing them in small groups, primarily women and children. For those still on board, each release gave them a little relief, but also a dose of dread, realizing they were being left alone with a madman that could blow them apart if negotiations failed. Ben Innes watched the chaos unfold, wrestling with an idea that was as reckless as it was dangerous. Later, he described his thoughts, quote, "I just threw caution to the wind. I figured if his bomb was real, I had nothing to lose anyway." The plan forming in his mind was simple, yet terrifying. If he could get close enough, maybe he could judge whether that bomb was actually real. His logical side clashed with his fear of putting everyone at risk if he guessed wrong. He remembered, quote, "I wanted to interact with the hijacker. I needed to understand if he had any other weapons." The cabin felt like a pressure cooker, each release of passengers tightening the grip of fear for those who stayed. Innes stole glances at Mustafa, measuring his movements and expressions. The thoughts of walking up to him, of locking eyes with the man who claimed to hold their lives in his hands, was terrifying. By the final hours of the ordeal, only 3 passengers and the crew remained, with most of the innocents now out of harm's way. If he made his move and it backfired, at least fewer lives were at stake. But as one of the last hostages, he also knew his time was running out. Innes thought, quote, "Why not? If he blows us all up, it won't matter anyway. Besides, it would be the best selfie you could ever send to your mates. Better than anything you'd ever get on a night out or on holiday." He rose from his seat and approached Mustafa, who still clutched the detonator tightly. Innes's heart pounded as he leaned in and made a bold request. He wanted a photo with Mustafa. His calm demeanor and smile caught the hijacker off guard. Innes remembers, quote, "He just shrugged okay, and I stood by and smiled for the camera while a stewardess did the snap." Innes smiled next to the severe hijacker, still wearing his explosive vest. The other hostages and crew watched in disbelief. But it was more than a senseless action. It was a calculated move to assess Mustafa's mental state and inspect the supposed explosives up close. Innes stated that if it had come to the worst, at least his mother could take some comfort from the picture, with him unafraid in his last moments on Earth. Thankfully, as soon as Innes stood side by side with Mustafa, he became 99% certain that the explosive belt was fake. It just looked too small, simple, and lacking the connections and complexity you would expect from an actual explosive device. A burst of adrenaline pumped through Innes's veins. If the vest was fake, he could do something about it. Yet he had to be careful not to put anyone in danger. He returned to his seat, still smiling, to, quote, plot his next move. Italian passenger Andrea Banquet was shocked at Innes's actions, quote, "I could not believe it when he got up for that picture. As he walked back, I said to him, 'Are you mad?'" Thankfully, Innes didn't need to take further risks. Just after he snapped the infamous photo, events outside the plane reached a breaking point. Hours into tense negotiations, Cypriot authorities finally convinced Mustafa to surrender. Passengers held their breath as he released the detonator and strolled toward the exit, hands raised in surrender. Security forces moved in fast, pulling him from the cabin and whisking him away. Relief flooded the remaining passengers and crew as they watched Mustafa vanish into custody. Innes knew his actions had been a strange mix of guts and instinct, but he didn't expect the photo to become what it did. Once it hit the media, it spread like wildfire. In no time, the image of Innes, curious and smirking beside a would-be bomber, was all over the news, hailed by some as a symbol of defiance, ridiculed by others as recklessness. With Mustafa detained, the truth emerged. His explosive belt had been a fake. It had all been a hoax, but the terror everyone felt was real. For Innes, however, that bizarre ordeal was forever frozen in a single, surreal snapshot. A strange moment of calm amid chaos, one that people would talk about for years.